Look closely at the images on your screen right now. This isn't a tourist group. These aren't visitors here to see the glittering spires of the Kremlin or take smiling photos in Red Square. These are the new builders of Vladimir Putin's new Russia, and they have just arrived in Moscow. Russian state media and independent investigative sources have confirmed the staggering scale of this transition. Approximately 10,000 Indian workers arrived in Moscow in a single massive wave. They weren't met with fanfare, but with the cold, sterile reality of industrial hostels across the city's periphery. This is the first and largest wave to arrive immediately after Putin's high-stakes visit to New Delhi. But this is only the beginning of a much darker, much more desperate story. To see the real picture, we have to go down to the streets. We have to go to the industrial heart of Moscow. The Kapata district, Moscow's main industrial artery, where the air is thick with the smell of sulfur and the sound of heavy machinery. On your screen, you see an endless, winding queue. Look at their faces. There isn't a single ethnic Russian among them. These are thousands of people brought in from the depths of India, Vietnam, Afghanistan, and the farthest reaches of Central Asia. But wait, don't forget to look at the other half of this picture. While these young migrants enter Moscow's factories to take their places at the assembly lines, you have to ask the most critical question of all. Where are the real owners of those factories? Where are the Russian men? The answer is 1,000 kilometers south. They are in the muddy, blood-soaked trenches of Donetsk. They are in the smoldering ruins of Avdiivka. They are in the dark, frozen forests of Kursk. As Russia sends its own sons to the meat grinder of the front line, it is being forced to import fresh blood just to keep the lights on and the gears turning. The words of Russian First Deputy Prime Minister Denis Manturov admit the Kremlin's absolute desperation. He stated flatly, "We are ready to accept an unlimited number of workers." Unlimited. Remember that word, because that word is the official declaration of Russia's demographic bankruptcy. It is the moment the state admits it can no longer sustain itself with its own people. Tonight, on Global Power Report, we break down how Putin is turning his country into a massive labor camp while sacrificing the very people he claims to protect. We will expose how Russian workers are being betrayed in their own legendary factories, and how the Kremlin is auctioning off the Russian soul for cheap foreign labor. This isn't just a story about migration. This is the story of an empire devouring itself. Let's look at the cold, hard numbers behind the chaos. The numbers do not lie, and they paint a picture of an economy on the brink of structural collapse. According to data from the Russian Central Bank and the Ministry of Labor, the country's economy is currently facing a catastrophic shortage of 4.8 million workers. This isn't just a minor labor gap. This is a hollowed-out void, so massive that no amount of Kremlin propaganda or staged TV shows can fill it. Why is this happening? The answer is as simple as it is tragic. Since February 2022, over 1 million men of productive age have vanished from the Russian economy. Some fled across the borders to Georgia, Kazakhstan, and Montenegro to avoid the draft. But most were swallowed by the war. According to Western intelligence reports, Russia's death and casualty toll has exceeded 600,000. Some Ukrainian sources, backed by logistical evidence and cemetery tracking, place that number even higher. Well over 1 million soldiers lost, maimed, or incapacitated. This means hundreds of thousands of able-bodied workers have been wiped out from the factories, the wheat fields, and the high-tech offices of the cities. When the war began, approximately 1 million educated, white-collar Russian men left the country. They were the engineers, the IT specialists, the architects of the future. They took their brains and their tax dollars with them. Now, Russia's industry, especially the defense industry that fuels this eternal war, is starving for human fuel. The Kremlin wants to produce thousands of tanks, but there are no welders to fuse the steel. They want to build precision missiles, but the engineers are either dead or in Dubai. They want to bake bread for the people, but the bakers are in uniform, huddled in trenches. Manturov's admission is a white flag. He says Russia needs 800,000 people just for the processing industry, and another 2 to 3 million for trade, logistics, and construction. The Kremlin's solution is a desperate importation strategy. Just like they import drone parts from China and artillery shells from North Korea, they are now importing work units from India. The quota is set. Slightly more than 70,000 Indians will be officially integrated into the Russian workforce by the end of 2025. But look at the map of Central Asia. For decades, Russia relied on Uzbek, Tajik, and Kyrgyz migrants. But even they are starting to leave. They see the falling ruble. They see the threat of being drafted into a war that isn't theirs. Russia has become so toxic that even its traditional colonies are looking for exits. This is why Moscow is now reaching across the ocean to India and Vietnam. They are desperate for anyone who will work for pennies in a war zone. Central Bank of Russia Economic Bulletin, UK Ministry of Defense Intelligence Update, Ukrainian General Staff Reports, Reuters Business Analysis. Think of Russia today as a dying machine that has run out of oil and is now trying to run on the blood of strangers. It is a form of imperial cannibalism. To keep the war machine turning, the state must consume the future of its people and replace them with rented shadows. Let's look at the famous friendship between Putin and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Behind the warm handshakes and the talk of BRICS solidarity lies a predatory reality that the Kremlin refuses to acknowledge. India is not Russia's equal partner. For New Delhi, Russia has become a donor state, a desperate, aging empire willing to sell its most guarded military secrets, its sovereign technology, and its natural resources, just for a few thousand workers and a lifeline of cash. India's plan is surgical. Extract the legacy of the Russian Empire. Take the S-400 technology. Take the cheap energy. Take the satellite data. And once the transfer is complete, once they have squeezed every drop of value from the Russian lemon, they will leave Moscow as a hollow, abandoned shell. Let's go to the heart of the Russian automotive legend, the Kamaz factories. For generations, Kamaz was the pride of the Soviet and Russian working class. It was the truck of the people. A Russian worker recently risked everything to turn on his camera and record the betrayal happening on the factory floor. This video, leaked to independent channels, is the most damning evidence of the Kremlin's mask slipping. The worker says, his voice heavy with bitterness, "We started importing a massive number of Indians to Kamaz. Before they arrived, the management told us there were no orders. They told us there was no money. They forced us to work only 4 days a week on reduced pay. They told us, if you don't like it, leave. And many of our friends, our brothers, they left. And then the shift happens. The Indians arrive. Suddenly, the orders appear. Suddenly, there is money. Suddenly, the factories are running 24/7, full weeks, triple shifts. The worker realized the truth. There was money all along. They just didn't want to pay us. They are pushing us out of our own factories to save a few rubles. We are being replaced in our own country while our sons die for the Russian world. This is population engineering in its purest, most cynical form. Putin screams about Russian nationalism on TV to keep the people angry at the West. But in the shadows of the factories, he is replacing his expensive and opinionated Russian citizens with silent Indian migrants who have no rights, no unions, and no voice. Kamaz worker testimonies via Telegram, Radio Free Europe Investigative Report, Meduza news analysis. If you think the situation for Indian workers is harsh, you haven't seen the drone labs of Alabuga. A chilling report from Ukrainian defense intelligence and satellite analysis reveals the most extreme example of modern state-sponsored slavery on the European continent. Russia is in the process of bringing 12,000 North Korean workers to its primary drone production facilities by the end of 2025. What is their mission? These men are not workers in the traditional sense.
They are biological machines. They will assemble thousands of Garan and Shahed attack drones, the very machines that terrorize Ukrainian cities every single night. The economics of this deal are purely dystopian. These men work in 12-hour shifts, often without days off. They are paid approximately $2.50 per hour. That's about $900 a month. But here is the kicker. The workers never see that money, not a single ruble. Russia pays the North Korean regime over $10 million in cash every month for this labor force. That money goes directly into the private coffers of the Kim regime to fund their own missile programs. The workers themselves live in high-security barracks under the constant watch of North Korean political officers. They are treated like disposable components. This is the ultimate insult to the Russian worker. While Putin claims to be the defender of traditional values and the protector of the Russian soul, he is literally building his war machine with North Korean slaves and imported Indian labor. The Russian man has been assigned only one role by the current Kremlin: to die. His job, his security, and his place in the economy have been sold to the lowest foreign bidder. GUR, Ukrainian Main Directorate of Intelligence, South Korean National Intelligence Service, NIS, Wall Street Journal, Special Report on Alabuga. Do you know what Vladimir Putin tells the cameras during his staged town halls? He says, with a straight face, "Our long-term historical task is to preserve and increase our country's population. The family is the foundation of the state." Now, listen to the voices he tries to silence, the voices that aren't allowed on Channel 1.
Give us back our husbands! Stop burying our sons! Where is the future you promised?
These are the screams of the Way Home movement. Russian women who are finally realizing that the war isn't just taking their men, it's taking their future. The rate at which Russian men are disappearing at the front is creating a demographic black hole. Today, in many industrial and rural regions, women make up a staggering 67% of the population. Just 4 years ago, before the special operation began, that figure was a balanced 53%. Russia is rapidly becoming a land of widows, orphans, and broken homes, floating on a sea of imported, disconnected labor. But this labor injection is creating a social friction that is reaching the boiling point. Russia has long struggled with deep-seated xenophobia and ultra-nationalist sentiments. Now, under the intense psychological trauma of war and the crushing weight of economic sanctions, that hostility is turning into open violence. Social media reports are surfacing of a dark irony. For months, the Z-Patriots, the hardline supporters of the war, praised India and Prime Minister Modi on Telegram. They posted memes about the BRICS Brotherhood and how they would defeat the Global West together. But the moment those Indian workers actually stepped off the trains and onto the streets of Moscow, the Brotherhood vanished. Radical nationalist groups in Moscow and St. Petersburg are now organizing vigilante patrols. They are attacking dark-skinned workers under the guise of protecting the neighborhood. Slogans like "Russia for the Russians" are once again screaming across the digital space. It is the great Russian paradox of 2024. The Kremlin claims it is fighting Nazism in Ukraine, while simultaneously
turning a blind eye to radical groups attacking its own allied workers in the streets of Moscow. Why doesn't Putin stop them? Because he can't. He needs the radical nationalist base to provide the volunteers for the front line. But he needs the Indian workers to provide the labor for the factories. He is trapped in a demographic pincer move, a sociological explosion at home, or an economic collapse in the factories. Either way, the Russian world he claims to be building is rotting from the inside out. OVD Info, Human Rights Monitor, Sova Center for Information and Analysis, Independent Russian Telegram Channels, The Economist Demographic Study. How did this exchange of souls begin? It didn't happen in a vacuum. It is the result of a massive, desperate, strategic bargain. When Vladimir Putin made his high-profile visit to India, he didn't go for the culture. He went because he was cornered. He signed the Reciprocal Exchange of Logistics Agreement, RELOS, and it is a geopolitical earthquake. This agreement means the Russian and Indian militaries can now use each other's bases, ports, and airfields. It means Russian warships, now hunted in the Black Sea, can find a safe harbor to refuel in Mumbai. It means Indian military aircraft can use Russian runways for training and logistics. Putin is screaming to the world, "I am not isolated. Look at my giant friend in the East." But the world sees the price tag, and the price tag is the total energy enslavement of Russia to India. Since the tanks rolled into Ukraine, Russia can no longer sell its energy to Europe. So, it has redirected its lifeblood, oil and coal, to India at humiliating, massive discounts. India is essentially building its superpower future on the back of cheap Russian energy. India buys Russian crude oil at prices significantly below the G7 price cap. They don't just use it, they refine it in Indian plants and then sell the finished petroleum products back to Europe. India has become the laundromat for Russian oil. They take the profit, while Russia takes the risk and the environmental damage. And then there's the diamond trade. Russia's Alrosa, the diamond giant, lost its traditional markets in Antwerp and New York. So Moscow is dumping its massive stocks of blood diamonds into India. India, the world's largest diamond cutting and processing center, takes the raw stones, polishes them, and re-exports them to the world. In this trade, Russia has been demoted. It is no longer a high-value technological power. It is a low-value resource depot, a gas station and a mine for India's rise. As Moscow piles its gold, oil, and diamonds into New Delhi, the Indian economy expands, while Russia shrinks. This is the lemon squeeze in action. Economic Times of India, Bloomberg Energy Markets Report, Indian Ministry of Commerce export data, Alrosa financial disclosures. Now we come to the most terrifying part of this labor influx, the part that keeps the families in India and Central Asia awake at night. Where will these 10,000 Indians be in 6 months? Will they still be at the Kamaz assembly line? Or will they be in a hole in the ground near Bakhmut? Ukrainian official Anton Gerashenko and several independent NGOs have raised a chilling alarm. Russia has a proven recruitment template for foreign workers, and it is a trap from which few return. We have seen it happen with Central Asians. We have seen it with Cubans. We have seen it with thousands of Nepalese men. The pattern is always the same. First, they are brought in under the promise of high-paying construction jobs or industrial work. They are given clean hostels and decent food for the first month. Then, the bureaucratic trap is sprung. A document is put in front of them. The document is written entirely in complex, legalistic Russian. The workers, many of whom don't speak a word of the language, are told it's a work permit extension or a bonus agreement. They sign, and the moment the ink is dry, they are told they have just signed a voluntary contract with the Russian Ministry of Defense. Within 72 hours, They are stripped of their civilian clothes, given a mismatched uniform, and sent to a training camp. Within weeks, they are on the front line, holding a Kalashnikov, used as Storm Z fodder to draw Ukrainian fire so the regular Russian army can identify positions. The Russian Ministry of Defense sees this new pool of 10,000 Indians not just as welders, but as potential infantry. These are men who have no embassy support, no connection to the local population, and no way to seek their rights. They can be lured with a false promise of Russian citizenship and family bonuses. For the Kremlin, this is a perfect calculation. If a Russian soldier dies, the state might have to pay a Lada bonus to a grieving mother in Omsk. But if a work contract soldier from New Delhi dies, the Kremlin pays nothing. A mother crying in India is not a political risk for Vladimir Putin. Russia is building a foreign legion of the desperate, an army of mercenaries gathered from its poor allies and deceived work partners to protect the throne of a czar who refuses to admit defeat. Al Jazeera investigative documentary on mercenaries, Nepalese Ministry of Foreign Affairs warning, Ukrainian Interior Ministry briefing, NGO Citizens Watch report. Ultimately, we must look at the Russian world, Ruski Mir, that Putin claims to be fighting for. He claims this war is about preserving Russian culture, Russian language, and the traditional Russian family. But the cold reality on the ground tells the opposite story. The massive human loss, the flight of the elite white-collar class, and the collapse of the birth rate are turning Russia into a ghost nation. The Kremlin is trying to patch the holes in the hull of a sinking ship with imported units. It is striving to keep the defense lines running and the domestic market afloat with millions of migrants who have no stake in the country's future. Even Denis Manturov, a man of the system, admitted the trend is catastrophic. If this continues, the very demographic structure of Russia will be unrecognizable within a decade. This isn't just a change in statistics, it's a change in the national DNA. In some industrial cities and Moscow suburbs, migrants already make up 40% of the population. This silent majority props up Putin's economy with their sweat, while the nationalist minority dies for his ego on the battlefield. Putin is caught in the Tsar's paradox. If he keeps importing labor to win his war, he destroys the Russian world he claims to save by erasing its ethnic character. If he stops importing labor, his factories stop, his tanks aren't built, and the war is lost within months. He has traded the long-term survival of the Russian people for a short-term survival of his political regime. He has turned Russia's window to the west into a wall of concrete, and its interior into a labor hub for foreign powers like India and China. The Russian Empire is devouring its own children to feed its appetite for territory. And when there are no Russian children left to send to the front, the house will belong to the strangers who were brought in to build it. The Russian soul is being auctioned off piece by piece to the lowest bidder, and the hammer is about to fall.